Hey Kunal, hi Roshni.
Hi all, good evening. Apologies for the delay. There was another dry run on progress.
Hi, good evening, Roshni. Good evening, Kapil.
Hi, you need to add Julian as a panelist. He's still an attendee.
Yes, I'm trying to add him. I've promoted all of them.
Yeah, Julian is here. Hi, Julian.
Hey folks, Julian joined.
Hi, Julian. Please meet Roshni and Kunal.
Hello.
They are from the Exito team. They're helping us organize and execute this particular event.
Hello.
Hi, Julian. Good morning. Julian, are we audible to you?
Folks, I can't hear anyone, if anyone's speaking.
Hello. Kapil, you can just maybe drop him a text that we can't hear him.
Okay.
Can you hear us now, Julian?
Let me just test my speaker and microphone.
Kunal, our colleague Vibhor is also trying to join. We forwarded him the same link. If you could accept him as well, that'd be great.
Sure. Roshni, we have Vibhor from the Enterprise DB team as well. If you see him on the waiting list, please add him.
Yes, I will keep an eye out.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Julian. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Oh,
Good morning.
good
Afternoon.
Good morning, Julian. My name is Kunal. I have been in touch with Kapil recently to execute this webinar.
Great. Nice to meet you, Kunal.
How are you doing, Julian?
Fine, thank you. Very good indeed.
That's awesome.
What's the format? How are we running this today?
Sure. I'll just have Roshni take it from here. Roshni, if you can please explain Julian the format and how he can share his screen.
Hi. Yes. So the control panel is on the bottom of the screen. You will be able to share your screen. I think currently right now also you should be able to share your screen. I will upgrade. I will promote you as a co-host as well, so that you will be able to smoothly share your screen without any glitch. Can you see the share screen option on the bottom of the screen?
Yeah. No, that's fine. I can do that.
Yeah.
That's no problem. Give me a second. Let
All
me just pull this up.
Okay. My colleague Anushri would be the host for the evening. She would be starting with addressing the audience and explaining the functionalities of the event. And moving on, she will introduce the topic and she'll introduce you. And then it will be promoted to you. The speaker would be, you can continue from there.
Got it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So can you guys see the screen now?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
your screen is visible.
Got it. So that's fine. And do we have many attendees? Do we know?
Julian, the attendee should start joining by 4:30, say in the next 5 to 6 minutes.
Do we? Yeah, no, understood. But do we know if many people are planning to join?
Yeah, so we do have 150 registrations. So we are looking at a good 50 plus attendees.
Oh, good. Nice.
Also, Julian, we have a holding slide with the topic of the webinar along with your photo. Do you want us to start with that and then you share your screen, or do you want this to be the opening slide? How would you prefer it?
I'd prefer to keep it on this one just because it's easier for me to move around the slides. I have one here where I'll introduce myself and kind of talk a little bit about, excuse me, my background, etc. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just stick with this one just to avoid having to share and reshare and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, Julian. Absolutely perfect. No problem.
Cool. Good.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Anushri here. I'm just testing the mic. 1, 2, 3. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're very clear. That sounds good.
Yeah, thank you so much.
How is my audio? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you all right.
Good.
Are we in a practice session right now, or are we already live, Anushri?
We are right. We are live right now.
Okay.
So I think attendees will be joining us.
Okay.
There's an echo whenever you speak, Roshni, I think.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Anushri. I represent Exito. On behalf of EDB and Exito, I would like to welcome you all to this session on why Postgres is becoming the standard in financial services. Before we begin the session, I would like to take you through the functionalities of this webinar. Your participation is important throughout the session. You will see a control panel on the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for the speakers, please enter the same in the chat window. Your queries will be answered. Also, please know that this session will be recorded for internal purposes, and EDB team will share the session recording and slides with you post the session. As we know, in the BFSI sector, large-scale digitization or modernization initiatives are providing an opportunity for companies to review their existing technology stacks and look at open source software alternatives. OSS databases are not new to the BFSI, but what is changing is their usage across a range of application tiers up to and including mission critical. Having said that, Enterprise DB offers a range of expertise and tooling that augments the core Postgres engine in order to help customers achieve full enterprise readiness and deliver scalable, performant, and reliable database offerings with deployment patterns that are designed to meet your SLAs. On that note, I would like to welcome the speaker for today's event. We have Mr. Julian Moffett, BFSI CTO, Enterprise DB. Julian is the senior IT leader with over 15 years of experience in the financial sector. He has experience in setting strategy and delivering products and services in both infrastructure and business application IT. He has been responsible for large-scale implementations of open source Postgres in both private and public cloud and has led global migrations from legacy database platforms to Postgres. We thank you for joining us today. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Anushree. So first of all, thank you to all the attendees. Very much appreciate folks taking the time. Hopefully I can share some of my experience and that's relevant for you guys. I'm going to take you through a few slides just to give you a little bit of background on, a little bit more on me. We'll talk a little bit about the rise of open source software generally, and more specifically, the rise of Postgres. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges potentially of running mission critical applications on open source software in the financial sector. And then what we'd like to do is spend a little bit of time just describing what EDB does and how EDB can help you be successful in that space. And then hopefully we'll have some time for question and answers as well. So let me jump in. So I think Anushree already gave you a fairly good introduction to me. So yeah, I've been in financial services for a long time. I worked for a very large bank called UBS for many, many years. And I did a whole bunch of different roles during my time there. But I think the roles that are most relevant are as Anushree outlined, I built out our private and public cloud Postgres offerings. So that was kind of a big deal for us. We were making a large shift away from a legacy platform. In our case, that was Oracle. And then in addition to kind of setting the strategy, I was responsible for building out new platforms. And then finally, I was responsible for running the program to migrate our applications off those legacy platforms. So yeah, lots of experience, lots of lessons learned, lots of scars on my back, lots of learnings that hopefully I can share with you guys and your partners. So let's jump in. So what we wanted to capture here is just what we see typically in the financial services sector. So this is what we see mostly from our customers in terms of why is there change in, what drives change in the financial services sector? What kind of initiatives result from that? And then what does that actually mean for technology teams at the end of the day? So in terms of drivers, this is a kind of a short list of kind of the macro trends that we see. So remaining competitive is critical. That's a very, very key thing in the financial services space. It's a very competitive space, as you can imagine. I think the more traditional financial services companies are being challenged by a lot of the new fintech companies that are out there. Reputation and talent attraction is a really important one. So reputation is key for all of the big financial services players, obviously. Having a strong reputation in the markets affects the share price dramatically. So that's very, very important. But talent is a really important thing in the financial services. If anyone's, I'm sure some of the audience have been reading a lot about the Great Resignation. So that's basically a kind of a movement that seems to be happening within the financial services space, where a lot of professionals in financial services companies are actually leaving the industry. So that's a problem for the banks. So often in terms of driving change, what the banks want to be doing, they want to make themselves attractive. They want to make sure that they're introducing technologies and running programs that are of interest to their employees so that they can retain talent, but equally attract talent from other players. The third thing that we see a lot of is a very, very strong desire to improve agility. So banks and financial services companies historically are not known for their time to market or their flexibility or their speed in delivering. And that's a challenge for them because, as I say, the new fintech companies that are coming up are much more agile. They're much faster to market. So the big players are having to kind of shift gears quite a lot and dramatically improve their developer experience, improve their time to market, move to more agile models, all of that kind of stuff. And ultimately get away from that legacy kind of situation where I think the technology teams would get some requirements that go off into a dark room and then 12 months later come out with something that the customers didn't want. So that there's a big shift happening there. The other thing we see, just again as a driver for change, is technology itself opening up new markets. So the big one, the obvious one, I think, in this space is the kind of the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, all that kind of stuff, particularly in the financial services sector, but absolutely not exclusively. The big banks and financial services institutions are sitting on huge mountains of information about their customer base, which they're now trying to kind of mine and monetize to be able to align products and portfolios for customers a little bit better. So lots of activity happening there. And then the last item that we've listed, and by no means least, but the last one is cost reduction. That's one that has been in the financial services space for a long time. I think ever since probably the major crash around 2008, the financial services industry companies have been very cost conscious. That's one that's always there and always drives change. So those are the items that kind of cause people to want to make changes. And then what we typically see with our customer base is that results in various initiatives. So we see a lot of people going through application modernization. We see a lot of people running digitalization initiatives. Digitalization, I think, is a little bit, gets a little bit of a bad reputation. It's a bit of a general term. I think the essence of it is absolutely correct. It's fundamentally about getting away from old disjointed processes, getting away from manual processes, and obviously introducing a much more systematic approach. Moving to agile is a big deal, as I mentioned. Again, just with kind of time to market, speed to delivery, more iterative development, bringing technology teams closer to business. Agile, it's as a methodology, is really key. So we see a lot of folks implementing that, and that's interesting because that, from a technology perspective, has some interesting side effects, particularly in respect to the rise of things like shift left. So empowering your developers to be able to take more control of their environments, or making options like infrastructure as code available. So being able to deploy databases by calling an API as an example. Just briefly, just to go through the remaining ones. So in terms of other initiatives, technology simplification, consolidation, all of those ones, we see those all the time. Those are very common in financial services companies. So we see a lot of folks going through application consolidation exercises. So often, particularly in the big players, they will be the result of acquisitions or mergers and acquisitions over the years. So you typically have some duplication in applications. So there's typically some consolidation exercises running. Often you have legacy applications where there's some technical debt that needs to be reduced. Often we see companies trying to reduce their technology estate. So in the database space, particularly, we see people with many different flavors of database, and they're trying to consolidate those down because simply the overhead in managing many database platforms that do the same thing is too great for the banks these days. They need to be more efficient in that space. End of life and operational risk remediation, those are also perennial initiatives that we see within our customer base. End of life, I think financial services, and again, I don't think we're alone in this, we're not well renowned for being particularly good at managing the currency of our estate. So unfortunately, what often happens is that work gets deprioritized. So maintaining and migrating to newer versions of software typically gets deprioritized in favor of business objectives. And then at some point that becomes a problem because your software goes out of support, and that's clearly a risk for any financial services institution. So we see a lot of folks running end-of-life activities. And where that's interesting these days is we're seeing folks sitting on end-of-life in their legacy database platforms. And one of the solutions to that is, rather than upgrade the existing legacy platform, they're actually looking to migrate to new, completely different technologies like Postgres as an example. So the last one on the list in terms of big initiatives that we see, data center downsizing and consolidation. Yeah, this is a big one. We see a lot of this happening more recently, and I think this is largely to do with the rise of ESG. So I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that, but environmental, social, and governance is a big kind of emerging movement within the financial services space and other industries as well, which is fundamentally around kind of making sure that we are managing our emissions appropriately, making sure that we're treating our staff appropriately, and that we've got the appropriate corporate governance in place. But with regard to CO2 emissions, what we see in the data center space is folks actually kind of consolidating, because they typically often want to move to more energy efficient data centers. We see folks downsizing their data center footprint because they're moving some of their application estates to cloud, and data centers are expensive. It's a very heavy sunk investment. So again, going back to the cost point, folks are trying to make sure that they're managing their costs appropriately. So if the drivers are being competitive, retaining talent and improving agility, et cetera, and the initiatives are kind of modernization, digitalization, data center downsizing, what does all that mean for the technology teams? So typically what we see is we see a lot of folks adopting public cloud, and also the kind of generally the as a service model. So what we see typically there is people have adopted kind of the three big CSP cloud platforms, whether that's Azure or AWS or Google. And they like the model, the developers like the model of that, whereby you can kind of provision technology on demand. So what we see is folks replicating that model on premise, and you'll find that, or we see a lot of our customers building kind of internal services for their developers, for whether it's for compute platforms or messaging platforms or database platforms. We see a lot of staff reskilling as a result. So naturally, as you can imagine, if you move to the cloud, to the public cloud, a lot of the work that folks would have traditionally done on premise in terms of engineering effort, in terms of deployment scripts for databases or for other infrastructure components, move to the provider. So teams no longer need to do that. So what we see a lot of our customers doing is then reskilling their staff. So we see some of those traditional engineering resources being reskilled towards more SRE type roles. We see developers, their roles changing slightly. There's, as I mentioned before, there's a movement called shift left, where developers basically are getting more control over the infrastructure, the traditional infrastructure components of their application stack. And that means typically things like Devops. So Devops is a big deal. In financial services, it still can be a little bit of a challenge once you get to the production environments, because obviously with segregation of duties, it's not necessarily that easy for developers to be able to deploy infrastructure directly to production. So that's largely within the non-production space, but still a big deal. And the key benefit there is helping developers to get access to technology much faster, so that they can focus on not on infrastructure, but rather focus on building business logic to develop applications to obviously make revenue for their companies. What else do we see? We see a lot of application refactoring. So largely as a result of folks moving to the cloud, I think a good thing is that folks are not doing what's called the lift and shift. They're not taking exactly what they had on premise and moving that one-to-one to cloud. They're taking the opportunity to kind of refresh their application stacks. They're taking the opportunity to kind of deconstruct large monolithic applications. Related to that, we see the rise of modularization at some extremes, kind of microservices. Not everyone has gone down the microservices route, but definitely modularization is a big deal. And as I said, we see new technology adoption. I think this is the opportunity that folks take to say, do you know what, now's the time to refresh my database technology. I want to remove my legacy database platform at this point. I'm going to touch the stack from top to bottom, and I'm going to have to refactor the whole thing, retest, regression test the whole thing. So now is the time to make that switch. So we see a lot of that, and that's for us the perfect timing. That's where OSS comes in. And that's where folks tend to look at open source technologies. And from our perspective, that's where we see a lot of folks looking to adopt Postgres at that point. So I think open source is absolutely firmly a mainstream technology these days. It hasn't always been, but certainly over the last 5 to 10 years, I think it has risen to be almost the de facto, the default option these days. I put some, we will share these slides afterwards. I put some links in here, but you don't have to go too far on Google to find a number of very well documented stories just articulating how much open source is out there these days and how much that's grown over the last few years. I think what's on the bottom left, I think what's particularly interesting in the database space is we're at this kind of tipping point right now where basically the use of open source database technologies is just about outpacing the more traditional proprietary commercial vendors. So that's very interesting for us, for a company like us in EDB. More interesting for us is that Postgres, from a database perspective, is always pretty much top of mind with the development communities and with our customers. I put a few links or a few items up here. I think if you look at any of the kind of developer forums, whether it's Stack Overflow or DB Engines or CNCF, you'll see that Postgres is always in the kind of the top 5 of kind of most loved, most wanted technologies. Very recently, I think in the 2022 Stack Overflow survey, I think Postgres finally came out as the top, it's the most desired database technology. And rightly so. Postgres has been around for a long time. It's not a new technology, and I think that's something that hasn't perhaps been fully understood, but Postgres has been around for a long time, 25 plus years, I think. It has been voted in the last 5 years DBMS of the year 3 times, which is impressive because 3 times is great, but I'm also not aware that any other database technology has won that award 3 times at all. So that's good. I guess the question is why do folks want to look at open source, and why do they want to look at Postgres? I think cost is a factor, clearly. I think the fact that you don't have to go into that more traditional kind of license and maintenance contract model is of interest to folks. So obviously that's a big influence on people's direct costs. But I think also really important is flexibility and the avoidance of lock-in. So I think a lot of folks have been burnt with some of the big, more traditional vendors and not being able to move off those platforms, or getting bound by commercial terms that were perhaps less favorable than they wanted. What's great about the open source space is I can deploy a Postgres database and I can get support from a vendor. And if at some point in the future, I'm not happy with the level of support I get from the vendor, or I'm not happy with the commercial construct, I can basically shop around and move to a different vendor. And it's largely a paper exercise, which is very different to if I'm on, as an example, an Oracle platform and I want to move to Postgres or to some other database. That typically, or that will definitely involve a massive migration. So you touch your entire application estate. The app guys have to refactor their code. There's lots of testing that's required. So that's a huge effort. So by moving to an open source database option, that basically just gives you the flexibility to kind of optimize your implementation without impacting your application teams, which is really positive. So that's one of the big drivers I think we see. One point just to note about Postgres, I think historically Postgres was viewed as a database just for development, a really good database. Everybody kind of is well aware of how strong a player it is, but I think it was viewed as just something you ran in dev, and it wasn't something you ran for production applications. That's absolutely not what we're seeing now. So that's changed quite dramatically. So we see a lot of people running Postgres or running applications on Postgres in production, running mission critical workloads. So that's, I think, kind of testament to the fact that Postgres is absolutely kind of mainstream these days. I think it's, from a relational database perspective, it's almost the default option these days, which is great for a company like ours. More specifically, just within financial services, I think the times have changed here. So I think in the old days, financial services companies were a little bit reticent to adopt open source. I think they were, they wanted the support of the big kind of vendors, but that's changed. We see a lot of activity in the space. I've just put a couple of things on the slide here. On the left-hand side, you'll see some fairly significant open source company acquisitions from the big established technology players. We've seen the emergence of Finos. So Finos is really interesting. So Finos is, the acronym doesn't quite match the explanation. So that's basically Financial Services Open Source Foundation. And that's a body that's come together with a number of really, really big players. I've listed a few of them at the bottom, but their goal is to basically develop open source technology solutions for use within the financial services sector. So kind of very strong statement that financial services is very much behind open source. Like I say, number of really big players in this. I've listed just a few of them. I've put a couple of links in here because I thought they were interesting. Goldman Sachs are very, very big players in the Finos space. They have a large-scale data management, data quality management solution, which they've outsourced significant portions of via Finos. Capital One and Deutsche, I just called those out because they both made very, very public statements that they are effectively open source first. So I think that the short summary there is that the tide has changed, and in financial services, open source is very much the order of the day. Just moving to the right-hand side of the page, so we see exactly the same thing. What we've got on the graphic here is basically a very kind of high-level kind of capability model of what we call the banking, financial services, and insurance space. So what we've done is we've broken each of those areas down into kind of their kind of sub-sectors, if you like. And the little orange dots indicate where we have customers. And as you can see just graphically from the picture, we basically got customers almost right across the board. There's a couple of white spots there that we need to fill. But in terms of what we are seeing in the financial services space, we're seeing adoption of Postgres largely across the map. I'm just going to call out a few of our key customers. ABN AMRO Clearing is a really big player in derivative and equity clearing, as you guys will know. They've been a customer of ours for quite some time. MasterCard also huge customer of ours. MasterCard needs no introduction. They've used Postgres for a long, long time to support disaster recovery on one of their primary payment gateways. ACI Worldwide, you may not be familiar with the name. They are a global payment solution processing company. Some of the numbers that go through their systems on a daily basis are eye-watering. So we got 14 trillion in payments and securities transactions, which is wild. They use, they also an EDB customer using Postgres. They use a tool of ours called BDR. It's actually been rebranded to Postgres Distributed, which is basically a multi-master replication solution, which allows them to achieve kind of extreme high availability across regions, which is also a really, really important thing. So yeah, to kind of summarize this page, I think historically banks were a little bit reticent to adopt open source. That has very, very much changed, and we are seeing exactly the same in our customer base. However, here's the but. Running open source software, full stop, regardless whether it's a database or not, is not always easy in the financial services space. We see a number of kind of enterprise readiness requirements that we kind of break down typically into these four categories. So reliability is key, scalability is key, performance and security. Reliability, meaning having high availability solutions, having disaster recovery solutions to meet whatever the appropriate recovery time objectives or recovery point objectives are. What we've seen, as I touched on earlier, changing is financial services companies using Postgres for higher tiered applications. So I think historically, Postgres may have been used for kind of lower tier apps, but we're seeing people using that now for mission critical applications. We definitely see folks requiring high availability disaster recovery solutions across availability zones, across data centers, and increasingly more across regional as well. From a performance perspective, I think within any of the big players, you're going to have a range of different workloads, and they'll have different TPS, transaction per second requirements. For us, it's really, really critical that we help our customers size the compute resources appropriately, whether those are on-premise resources or whether they're cloud resources. It's really important that we size those appropriately, because that's fundamental to the database's performance, obviously, as you can imagine. Scalability for big enterprises is critical. So for anyone that's running hundreds or thousands of database, you need really quite advanced and sophisticated orchestration and automation to manage that, in terms of repeatably and reliably provisioning databases, being able to patch databases, being able to monitor databases and perform kind of daily operations on them at scale. That's really, really important. So we see a lot of a kind of fairly high bar to entry there for folks to be successful. In the security section, always critical in financial services. I think data protection has always been key. We obviously have a whole lot of very sensitive information in our financial services applications. Encryption, redaction are recurring themes that we see. Data access, so identity and access management topics are very, very important. Making sure that kind of data is visible to consumers on a need to know basis. And what we typically see on the right-hand side, and I've just listed these out, is a series of what folks often refer to as control requirements. So it kind of, building on the security aspect, it's about having the appropriate authentication and authorization requirements. So typically things like multi-factor authentication, having central identity management solutions or central entitlement management solutions. The big concern there is having orphaned accounts in a database. So if, for example, I worked with a company and I left that company, what we don't want to do is have my account remaining in that database that could potentially be compromised at a later date. Backup and restore is critical. Obviously, we need to make sure that our backups are functioning appropriately. There's regulatory obligations around testing the integrity of those backups often. Disaster recovery, same thing, typically regulatory obligations around ensuring we have a disaster recovery solution. Capacity monitoring is critical, obviously, asset management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you by going through them all, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with these in any case. But I think that the message is there's a lot that needs to be taken into account when you want to deploy any software, but particularly open source software in a financial services context. So with that in mind, where do you begin? How do you even start there? So typically, if you're starting that journey, you're going to have a bunch of questions around, well, how am I even going to manage all of these databases? Where do I find Postgres expertise? Where do I go to get best practices? How do I do 5 nines? How do I deliver an always on solution? Typically, how do I need to have a hybrid cloud solution? Do I need to run applications both on-premise and in the public cloud at the same time? Where do I start on this thing? How do I choose which applications to move to my open source technology or to Postgres? How do I prioritize these things? And then fundamentally, if I'm moving from a legacy platform, how do I approach that migration? So these are all really, really key questions that folks have. And this is where my somewhat glib answer is find a partner. I know this from personal experience. You can try to figure all that stuff out yourselves. And in my prior experience, we thought we were very, very smart and were able to do a really great job on our own. And we got there in the end. But if I was going to do that exercise again, I would absolutely work much more closely with a partner to help us answer some of these questions up front. And this is where I think EDB excels. EDB is very, very good at looking beyond just the database engine. So anyone, including me, can download Postgres and stand up a single database. But actually, at enterprise scale, as we just looked at, you have so many considerations from how does a developer get access to the database? How do I request a database? To how do I automate the provisioning of that database? And related to that, what patterns of that database do I need to deploy? So like I say, you're probably going to have different tiers of application. You're probably going to have different performance requirements. What you typically want to do is give your developers different options so they can choose, I want the super duper high available multi-region database solution down to, at the lowest level, perhaps just a single server implementation. And for us to be successful in that, we want to automate all of that behind the scenes and avoid any kind of manual deployment. Those days, thankfully, are long, long gone. Or at least most of our customers are getting away from that fairly significantly. I think another area where EDB is really good, and we touched on earlier, is integration with compute and storage. Again, critical to the database's performance, but something not to be ignored. Our offerings can run on many different platforms. The only real distinction we make from an EDB perspective on where we run our products is whether it's self-managed or managed. Managed is our public cloud offering. But where it's self-managed, those can run on bare metal, they can run on virtual machine infrastructure, they can run in hypervisor environments, and those can be run either on-premise or in your cloud provider of choice. So that integration with compute and storage is really critical, again, to the database performance. Integration with identity and access management, also critical. This is one that often gets overlooked, and I've worked in teams in the past where the database engineering team has built this beautiful, super slick provisioning mechanism, and they've reduced the time to provision down to minutes. And they've gone, ta-da, and the developer clicks the button, gets a database, but now can't log into it because what they haven't integrated is how to provision users into that database, how to integrate with a central identity management system, how to appropriately authorize those users. It's kind of like delivering a very shiny car, but not giving folks the keys to get in and drive it. So that's key to not overlook. Backup and monitoring are absolutely critical. EDB also has a number of solutions that can help folks there, and I'll talk you through some of those shortly. Day-to-day operations, also one not to be overlooked. This, I found from experience, you can build the shiniest, fastest car. You can deliver this great database patterns. You can deliver a great provisioning mechanism. But if you haven't got the right folks, the right skills, the right people who can answer questions at 3 a.m. in the morning when something breaks, then what happens, unfortunately, is that your users typically get a bad impression. So regardless of how good your actual platform is, if you've got problems that happen, and they will happen in the middle of the night, and you haven't got the right support, then your reputation is potentially at risk. So really, really important to kind of train your staff appropriately. We can also help with that. We do training, and we also do kind of, we have a remote DBA service, which is basically we transplant resources into your organization to help folks make sure they've got the appropriate skill levels. And then finally, the last thing is just always to consider, how do you keep your environment evergreen? How do you keep current on your software versions? How do you do patching and upgrades? Patching, for anyone that I'm sure folks on this call will have been familiar with Log4j and all of the kind of excitement that ensued there at the tail end of last year. When one of those events happens, we need to, in financial services, as with any other industry, but particularly in financial services and at scale, you need to be able to react quickly. You need to identify what versions you're running on very quickly, and you need to be able to remediate and patch very quickly. So those are critical things that I think EDB looks at holistically when we look at the database. Like I say, it's way, way beyond just being able to get some database binaries installed and operated. It's actually that whole solution that's really critical we find, to our consumers in order for them to be successful. We look at all of those components, and then what we do is we work with your teams to help kind of develop the appropriate solution based on your RTOs, your RPOs, your different performance requirements. We'll take a very simple kind of plan, build, and run approach, and we deploy different SMEs at each stage of that process. So we are one of the largest software support services company. We've got a huge number of customers globally. We have 4 core locations and many offices globally. We are key in the Postgres community. We are huge supporters of the Postgres community. We contributed actually more than 30% of the code specifically for Postgres 14. At any given time, we have roughly around 300 dedicated Postgres engineers across our organization who are there to either answer your support calls, to help with bug fixes, to promote fixes and to get those committed. We also have 3 of the 7 Postgres core team members who are EDB employees. So the strength of the community is really, really important for us. We want to increase the footprint of Postgres globally, but we also want to drive the Postgres technology. We want to, from a technical perspective, we want to increase the capabilities of the database engine. And from a non-technical perspective, we're very keen to kind of build the community, continue to grow the community, and to educate folks on some of the use cases and the benefits of using Postgres as a database. From a support perspective, we do 24/7, 365 support globally. We've kind of followed the sun support. As I mentioned, we have this remote DBA service. So where folks perhaps don't have the skills yet in their enterprise, we can transplant staff to help you make sure you can operate those environments appropriately. We have various other resources we can deploy. So I work in our CTO office. We can come in and help kind of build your strategy, help design the patterns that you need to deploy. We can help understand better the problems that you're trying to solve and make sure that we've got a solution that's commensurate with those problems. From a platform and tools perspective, I'll show you this a little bit more in detail, but it's a little bit more than just the database, right? We have two key database platforms that we support. So clearly PostgreSQL being the community edition of Postgres. And on top of that, we have something called EPAS, which is EDB Postgres Advanced Server. So that is built off community Postgres, but it has a couple of key additional features. So that has built into an Oracle compatibility layer. So that's very appealing for some of our customers who are migrating away from Oracle. For anyone that's done that, you'll be familiar. That's quite an effort, and there's lots of really good tools out there. So Ora2PG is an open source tool to help you migrate your PL SQL, your schema objects, et cetera, but it's still quite an effort, and it can be quite an effort for your application teams to do that migration. EPAS reduces that effort quite dramatically with the Oracle compatibility layer, because as an example, the PL SQL that you've got in your Oracle database will, for the most part, just run out of the box in EPAS, so you don't need to do that migration there. It will vary hugely from database to database, but we have seen, in terms of reduction of effort in migration, anything up to an 80% reduction in effort, which is clearly a big deal if you're doing this en masse and you have many databases. What we often do is we position EPAS as a stepping stone for folks. So we find a lot of our customers are on a journey to get to pure open source, to get to ANSI SQL compliant community Postgres. What we often find is our customers have deadlines that they need to meet in terms of their getting out of their incumbent estate. You may have a renewal that's coming up, and simply the pressure of time to get that work completed means that the EPAS can often be a really good option for folks, just to kind of accelerate that process, get people away from the legacy database platform, and then at a later date, you can migrate to the full-blown community edition. We also offer tooling. We have a number of tools to help operate the Postgres database. So we have tools for high availability, as I touched on earlier. We have tools around backup. Monitoring is key again. If you're running hundreds or thousands of databases, we've got some tooling to help you there. and also tooling around the migration as well. So moving particularly from Oracle databases to Postgres, we have a series of tools, we call it a migration toolkit, to help people in that process. And finally, we offer services. So we offer services where we can kind of deploy staff into your organization to help optimize your Postgres environment, to help design your Postgres implementation, to help with migration. We can help with things like upgrades en masse. We can help kind of design that approach, all of these types of things, and basically embed experts in your teams for whatever the requirement is. So yeah, we pride ourselves on the expertise that we have within EDB. Like I say, at our heart, we are a community supporter. We drive the Postgres community database, but we have a level of expertise which I think is, in many cases, unparalleled with some of our peers in the industry. So as you can see, Postgres, this was for Postgres 14, EDB made a fairly significant contribution here. And this is just to give you, to kind of graphically show you what I just described a little bit, meaning that we're much more than just the database. It's about the database, it's about the tools and the expertise that we can deploy. As I say, these are all of the tools that we've got in the space here. We can probably do some very dedicated sessions on those for anyone that's interested. But this, I think, is also really, really important on the right-hand side. We no longer really make a distinction between private and public clouds, where the distinction we make now is whether consumers are self-managed or fully managed, as I mentioned earlier. And as I say, the products that we run can be deployed on many different platforms. You can see them kind of graphically represented there. But yeah, I think just to wrap up and then hopefully open up for some Q&A, we've obviously seen significant growth in the usage of open source software. We definitely see a change in mindset within the financial services industry. Financial service industry players are very, very keen to kind of drive the open source agenda. We see Postgres clearly as one of the leading open source technologies, if not the leader in the database space. But, and here's the big but, it's not always that easy to manage data in a financial services context. There's a lot of enterprise level requirements that need to be met. So our strong recommendation again is find a partner to work with, work with someone like an EDB to help you kind of address some of those challenges, work with folks who've done this before, who've got the level of expertise to help you get the best out of Postgres. And this is a little bit of a marketing piece, but why EDB? I think that the big thing is there is expertise within EDB that you just will not find elsewhere. We have folks in our team who literally contributed to Postgres since its inception, so since it began. As I touched on earlier, we pride ourselves on looking at your holistic database solution. It's really, really important to us to understand the database ecosystem. How is it going to be consumed? What different flavors of database do you need to deliver from a topology perspective and from a performance perspective? We have some of the best SMEs all the way through the organization, so within our product department, but also in our support shop. And I think that's become very, very obvious to me as historically being on the other side of the fence. I think the level of support that I've seen within EDB is very, very high. We have a lot of folks who are genuinely contributing to the code base of Postgres in our support organization. We obviously, with that, we have the tooling that can help folks kind of optimize the Postgres implementation. And that last piece around deployment flexibility is key. I think we're finding, certainly over the last few years, as I mentioned, folks are looking to adopt cloud, they're looking to adopt as a service offerings, and having a database platform that's capable of being deployed on bare metal, on virtual machines, on Kubernetes implementations, either on-premise or in cloud, is really, really key. And then finally, the last thing, and again, this is the reason it's the last thing, is because it's probably one of the key things for us at EDB. we really want to support and continue to drive the community. Again, we help to drive technically PostgreSQL development, but also just from a non-technical perspective, we want to spread the word about Postgres. We want to educate people on how to get the best out of Postgres. We want to educate people on best practices, all of that kind of stuff. So we're very, very embedded there. With many of our my teammates are involved in Postgres user groups in various parts of the world. So again, something we find really, really important. So yeah, let me pause there and thank you for your time and open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Julian, for your insights on the topic and for honoring us with your presence. Thank you all. As we have come to the end of the session, the floor is open for questions from you all, and the speaker will be glad to answer them. You could put down your questions in the chat. Meanwhile, we do have a question in the chat box. How do you benchmark Postgres SQL against the other open source technology like Mongo, DB, etc., and open source provided by AWS?
Yeah, no, interesting. So a very good question. So so I think Postgres and Mongo are different animals, quite different use cases, I think, for anyone who's familiar with it. Going to a document-based model versus traditional relational is a very different beast, and both absolutely have their merits. So yeah, we do run benchmarks fairly regularly on Postgres versus other platforms. What I would perhaps propose to do is to share, after the session, we'll share some links to where we've done benchmarking exercises against either other databases or running Postgres on, to your point, cloud service providers such as AWS. But good question.
Thank you for answering, and I hope Stanley has listened to the answer. And we have another question that is on community Postgres versus EDB Postgres. How does the community version perform as compared to the EDB Postgres?
Yeah, no, again, very good question. So our EDB Postgres Advanced Server is built on the community. So that is the foundation of our offering. So the question we get often is, well, if you're running the Oracle compatibility layer, doesn't that impact performance? And actually, we've found that actually that's not the case. It's very, very interesting. But performance-wise, again, I think just generally with Postgres, the performance of the database is fundamentally how you size the compute and the storage infrastructure that you associate with the database. So again, we in EDB, I think, are very good at helping our customers assess their workloads, assess their transaction per second requirements and their performance requirements generally, to help them determine the appropriate compute and storage platforms to be able to give folks the performance. But yeah, between EPAS and Postgres, we've not seen significant performance differences. But again, I think what's probably hopefully valuable to folks is after the call, or when we send out the slides with the call, what we'll do is send you a link to where we publish some of our performance benchmarks on our website. And I will apologize, it's probably not that easy to find just from browsing. So we'll make sure that we send you some direct links on that one.
We have more questions in the Q&A. We have a question from Parimal Kumar from Exceedance. He wants to know, can you please let us know the data security offered by Postgres?
Yeah, so I think so that's a big topic. So data security is primarily, I think, around a couple of things. So typically encryption of data in transit and at rest. So Postgres itself, from a community perspective, does not currently have an equivalent to something like TDE in SQL Server or Oracle. So there is work that's happening there, and we're working very closely with the community to actually try and build that in. What we see, and what I've done personally in the past, is we've offloaded the requirements for encryption and rest to the storage tier. So effectively what I've done is just worked with compute teams to have them encrypt at a disk level. In our managed cloud offering, we employ largely the same technique insofar as we offload that to the cloud service provider and have them encrypt data at rest. But yeah, in terms of, and people always ask about TDE because typically I think often people want to manage the encryption within their database administration team. That's not available in Postgres today. We are introducing that in our EDB Postgres Advanced Server option, and that will be available. And I'm going to possibly get this wrong, but I think that's coming early next year. But we are working also with the community to see if we can try and embed that directly into the community platform itself. So yeah, that one's is key, absolutely. And along with that, so aside from just kind of encryption at rest, we have a number of different modules around PG audits to help folks with kind of more advanced auditing, capturing effectively keystrokes and what actions were performed on the database. And again, typically from a compliance perspective, anyone, most of the audience here, I'm sure will be well aware, those are high requirements there. PG crypto is another one that's interesting to kind of, it's another module, another extension to Postgres to help encrypt specific columns in the database where you might have sensitive information that you don't want to expose. So yeah, it's a broad topic, but there's several options to try and close some of those potential gaps that folks might perceive. And again, we run many databases for people for mission critical apps. So there are solutions to many of those questions. I'm reading, I think Stanley's got another question in the Q&A box around how easy or difficult is it to convert Oracle database to Postgres, especially tons of data which has accumulated over many years. Yes, have we done such a conversion before? Yes, absolutely. So how easy or difficult is it? It's not easy. Very candidly and very openly, it is not easy. So I think we've got two primary routes there. So you can go direct to community Postgres, and there are a number of tools out there. Ora2PT is one I touched on earlier to help kind of make an assessment on your schema and your PL SQL and perform some degree of conversion. The big challenge with larger databases particularly is the actual data migration part of the conversion. So I think there's typically three parts to a conversion. You have the assessment piece, which is where you'll look at the database, you look at the DDL effectively, and you will get a sense of how much effort is involved to effectively transcode PL SQL, to migrate schema objects, etc. Then there is the actual conversion of that PL SQL. And again, some of that can be automated, some of that requires your developers to do work, and the conversion of the schema objects. And then the last piece is actually the data migration. And again, to Stanley's question, that can be a challenge where you've got high volumes of data, or not even sometimes it's not even the volume of data, it's the data types. So typically blobs and other kind of data types like that can be very slow to migrate, and that's a problem if you have a short window of downtime to cut over from an old application to your new Postgres database. So what we typically look at there is CDC Solutions, so change data capture solutions. And what that effectively means for anyone that's not familiar is you basically take snapshots of your database very regularly, and you migrate the majority of the data prior to your actual cutover to go live, meaning that when you go live, what you're actually migrating from a data perspective is just the delta from the last snapshot you took. So that dramatically reduces the window that you require to do the data migrations. But yeah, it's not an easy process. It can be time consuming. That's why we We find that EPAS, our EDB Advanced Server offering, can be very valuable to folks. It takes away a lot of the effort in conversion. We have teams of people that have done this many times over. We have our migration toolkit that can help with we have basically a version of Aura2PG on steroids. It's a very kind of advanced GUI based version of Aura2PG that will do the assessment and do some code conversion, and we have other various tools to help with that data conversion piece. So yep, it can be difficult, but EDB, I'm very confident, has the expertise to help you do that, and we have done it many times.
Thank you, Julian. We have more questions in the Q&A. Can we go ahead with that?
Yeah, I don't think I'm seeing them all. The only one I can see is Stanley.
We have a question.
Apologies, I'm looking in the wrong place. I see them now. I see, when will it be available on the marketplace? So the question is, I think that is about Postgres. Is that about Big Animal being available on the market, on the Azure marketplace? Big Animal is our public cloud facing offering that is actually already available in the Azure marketplace. And my apologies if I've misunderstood the question there. Just looking at the next one, Postgres upgrades from 10 to 14. What are the challenges? Yeah, so there are challenges. Typically with any migration, if you're migrating from several versions back, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that in one step. So what we always recommend there is to engage our services team, who have again done this many times for customers, to take a look at your environment, to help develop a plan of attack effectively for you guys, and take that kind of stepped approach. Often you have to take a stepping stone approach where you'll upgrade from 10 to a higher version, and then you can do an in-place version upgrades to the latest, to 14 as an example, or 15 when it comes. But yeah, it's probably a larger subject than I can cover right now, and unfortunately, but we'd be happy to take that one up offline as necessary. Major difference between Postgres and Oracle, again, that's a huge subject on its own, but I think what we are seeing, and this is over the last few years, what we're seeing is that Postgres, from a very high level statement, from a functionality perspective, is very much up there with Oracle these days. I think historically there were some differences, and Postgres might have been perhaps not as advanced in some areas. We see Postgres these days as almost the default relational database, and I think that the Stack Overflow survey kind of affirms the same. So from a capability and a functionality perspective, very much on a par with Oracle these days. So there are a number of implementations we've done in India. I'm not sure I'm able to share the names of those companies on this forum. I'll double check that, and perhaps we'll send out some answers to that one after the fact. What else have we got? How the version migration helps in performance of DB. So there's obviously been performance enhancements within subsequent versions since 10 in the database. What we'll do, and I don't know off the top of my head, but what I'll do is I'll try and find if we've issued some blog materials or other articles just to describe some of the performance enhancements between the different versions. And again, we'll send those out after the call. I'm just reading the question. How is clustering supported by Postgres? Very good question, and very key question. So there's several different options. So you've got a typical kind of primary and standby implementation, which you can implement by many different ways. We recommend Rep Manager from an open source tool perspective. There's others out there, such as Patroni. We have our own proprietary tool set called Enterprise Failover Manager, which helps kind of manage that. But yeah, very strong capability from EDB there to help folks implement high availability and clustering. And apologies, I'm just looking at the clock. I'm going to try and go through these other questions very quickly. What benefits does EDB Postgres offer in cases of migration from Oracle DB? Yeah, I think we touched on that one early. I think it's largely in reducing the effort of the migration. There's a question on AWS. Yes, we can run our Big Animal offering, our public cloud offering, on the AWS. That is available. and any white paper available for comparable benefits vis-a-vis other database platforms. Again, let me double check on that in terms of what we've actually published, and what we'll try and do is send that out as a follow-up after the call. So thank you. I went through those questions very quickly. Apologies if I didn't answer them fully for folks.
As we are ending this session for today, I would like to thank each one of you for taking your time and joining in for this event. Thank you, Julian, for your insights on the topic and for honoring us with your presence and sharing your insightful inputs and experiences. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.